Welcome to Drugs and Stuff, a podcast from the Drug Policy Alliance.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Drugs and Stuff. Now, you know Drugs and Stuff, that's the place where smart people talk about drugs. Now, earlier this month, my tag team partner Derek Rosenfeld and I were live on location at the Reform Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, which was an amazing experience. Reform 17 was very, very powerful. It was a gathering of more than 1,500 experts and advocates and folks who agree that the war on drugs has done more harm than good. There were so many compelling moments from, the opening speech from Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow. She gave a powerful call to arms to the drug policy reform movement. Our board president, Ira Glasser, literally passed the baton to our new executive director, Maria McFarland Sanchez Moreno. And that was a wonderful moment. And DPA Senior Director Asha Bandele led some amazingly powerful and necessary conversations that really provided a lot of thought-provoking and, action-inspiring moments for the attendees. Now, if you're interested in the sights and sounds of the Reform Conference, I encourage you to take a look at DPA's Facebook page, where we had a Facebook Live stream of Michelle Alexander's opening plenary speech and many other events from an amazing week in Atlanta. Thank you so much to Atlanta, Georgia, for showing some genuine Southern hospitality and providing a great backdrop for an amazing conference. Derek and I were lucky enough to capture many of these conversations with so many smart people, committed people at the Reform Conference. And we were lucky enough to be able to sit down with a lot of folks. And we want to bring these conversations to you over the coming days and weeks. And to kick it off, we want to share with you a conversation that we had with Marsha Rosenbaum. Dr. Marsha Rosenbaum is one of the mothers, if you will, of the modern drug policy reform movement. Marsha is the Director Emerita at Drug Policy Alliance, and she headed up all of DPA's work around youth and drugs. Marsha regularly speaks to the PTA and other parent groups in the media to talk about teenagers and drugs. And it's a wonderful conversation, and you're going to hear Marsha talk about how this is her 22nd Reform Conference. That's a lot of conferences, but a lot of minds that have, been influenced by her amazing work. If you're interested in the work that Marsha does, she produced the seminal booklet, Safety First, which you can find on the Drug Policy Alliance website, drugpolicy.org. And now here's our conversation with Marsha Rosenbaum. Hey, Marsha.
Hey, Tommy.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So, don't want to be giddy, but I will be. So, sitting next to me is Marsha Rosenbaum. And if you don't know who Marsha Rosenbaum is, shame on you. Dr. Marsha Rosenbaum is a Director Emerita of the Drug Policy Alliance and a pivotal member in the founding and the growth and, the success of this organization. So I'm personally pleased as punch to have her here. And Marsha, how many conferences is this for you? This has been one or two, right?
22.
20 what?
Wow.
Yeah, if you include the early Drug Policy Foundation conferences and all of the DPA ones that came after, It's 22 conferences.
Wow. Did you ever envision that it would grow to this size, this level of sophistication and, success?
Not in the early years, although the last few years it's been looking more and more promising every year. More and more people every year, more and more energy. DPA has gotten much more professional.
How many people were there in 1988?
500?
Even that many?
Maybe 500. Maybe 500.
So it's a third of that size.
Yeah.
So you had a great panel the first day of the conference on what high school kids should know about drugs, and I think that was a very popular panel simply because of the number of folks in the room, but also the makeup of folks that you had. Recap that panel a little bit and let folks know what they missed out on, because it seemed like it was a really great one.
What we were trying to do in that panel was to present different views from people who were doing drug education in various ways, and help the audience know the perspectives and where they're going. And I was particularly interested in the content of what they thought teenagers should know about drugs, the challenges they face trying to get these projects and these programs out into the world, and how they're dealing with those challenges. Because I felt that the people in the audience were interested themselves in doing drug education and talking to teenagers in particular. And they're looking for perspectives. They're struggling. They're trying to figure out how they can get their message out there. And so that was what the panel was about. And we at Drug Policy Alliance have created a curriculum for high schools that is just top-notch. It was created by an educator, and it is a program that was designed to be incorporated into high school health classes. So I frankly was interested in showcasing this program, this brand new, it's not, you can't even call it new, it's emerging program at this conference. I wanted to get the information out there. So on the panel was the woman, the educator who designed the curriculum, Amani Rushing, and so that was a little ulterior motive.
Is there a little bit of a taste? Because I was telling you this before we started recording. I'm an uncle now. All of a sudden, my sister has a beautiful baby boy, and they're starting to think about these kinds of conversations, and it's interesting to be at this age right now to remember my health class, my education, DARE.
Yeah, look at you now.
And look at me now. But what should it look like when a 7th grader goes to health and to learn about drugs?
Well, let's talk about what age, the ages. 7th grader, 8th grade.
That was where I was when I first remember my first health class was 7th grade.
I think that what I have thought all along, when I had my own 7th grader, 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, 20 years ago, which is how I got interested in drug education in the first place, I discovered that the information that my daughter initially was getting as a very proud DARE graduate was, it wasn't even questionable at best. It was just false. It was old scare tactics. Now we have new scare tactics. But the idea has been, first, abstinence is the only option. And let me just be clear right from the get-go. I like abstinence. I think abstinence is the best choice. I wanted my kids to be abstinent. I don't apologize for that. However, I live in a large metropolitan area on the West Coast, which happens to be San Francisco. So okay, put that aside. And I knew that my wish for abstinence, was very likely to be a fantasy. And so, if I couldn't have abstinence, I knew I needed a fallback. I needed a plan B. And my plan B, and the only thing I really cared about, I knew my kids, given their, to be honest with you, privilege, their socioeconomic situation, they're in all likelihood going to get through experimentation, especially with marijuana. But I still and all feared for their safety. And so that was what I wished at the time these programs would focus on. Yeah, it's stress abstinence, that's fine. But what separated my view from the view, the Just Say No of Nancy Reagan at that time, before, was don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But if you do, here's what you need to know to be safe. And no programs then included any, we call that harm reduction. No programs included it. So that's what I had wished for. What I did tell my kids, and what I wished the classes would do, would be to go through the various substances that they were likely to encounter and talk about what they really are. What do they do? Let's bring in some science. Teach kids some science here. And to impart to them how people get into trouble with these drugs and what people do to avoid getting into trouble. That's the information I wanted out there. I wanted harm reduction. That didn't exist. It has been, that was 20 years ago or so. It was a David and Goliath battle for a lot of reasons. One is primarily political, and some of it is bureaucratic. So I basically, to tell you the truth, decided that I couldn't penetrate the edifice of the educational bureaucracy. Like, there was no way to do it without millions and millions of dollars to create a program, get it implemented, and evaluated. That was just, it wasn't happening. So my perspective was, okay, I can't get into the schools with this. So instead, I can get to parents. And what I wanted to do, I knew that parents shared my fears and concerns for their kids. They always have, they always will. And so, okay, how do I get to parents now? So I discovered that at DPA, there was a consultant who I met, and she had done work with anti-violence work with California State PTA. California State PTA, and I'm a Californian, so, you know, I mean, that was where my office was. That was my focus. So the California State PTA, which had 1 million members, second largest parent organization in the world. That's where I wanted to go, and I had written first a letter to my son, which appeared in our San Francisco Chronicle. When my son was entering high school, I had, just at that point, I had gone to an editorial board meeting at the Chronicle with, well, your former boss, Ethan Nadelwood. And Ethan and Dan, mostly Ethan, were talking about harm reduction to the San Francisco Chronicle, because this was 1998. Harm reduction it was a new concept, relatively new, right. Outside of our little movement, you know, here. And so they're talking about harm reduction and what it does, and the editorial board, they're nodding their heads. And one of the people on the editorial board, he's still on the editorial board, Marshall Kilduff is still there. And his son and my son happened to play soccer together. So he knew that, you know, that we had sons who were the same age. So he says to me, okay, well, all this harm reduction stuff, that sounds okay for adults. But what do you say to the kids? And I just laid out this perspective I just laid out. It's better to abstain, but if you don't abstain, you're gonna encounter drugs. So if you choose to use them, here's what you need to know. My only concern is your health and safety. Okay. So he says, if you will write that as a letter to your son, my 14-year-old son, I'll run it as an op-ed in the Chronicle. So, okay. So it took me a couple of weeks to craft this letter to Johnny, my son Johnny, and it did appear in the Chronicle. And when it appeared in the Chronicle, despite the shock of my son, I told him, I read the letter to him. I said, do you understand what I'm saying in this letter? Because I don't want to publish a letter that you don't get.
Right.
And he was so not interested in what I was doing that
Sounds like a 14-year-old.
yeah, he
right.
said, okay, Mom, yeah, I get it, Mom. And then it appears in the Chronicle on Labor Day, right before school started. And the phone starts ringing, and my email starts to light up. And with people who just said, I loved your letter. I want to use that letter to my own kid, and I want to hear more about what harm reduction drug education would look like. And so I set about basically expanding the letter and laying out a perspective. And I called it Safety First, a reality-based approach to teens and drugs, because my belief at the time and still is that the messages just aren't realistic to kids. And they're not realistic. Some of them are absolutely ludicrous. I mean, everybody remembers maybe not everybody, but if you were around, the fried egg commercial, this is your brain, this is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the Rachel.
There's that one, and then there's some other claims that they were making about marijuana, like boys will grow breasts, half of your brain cells will get erased.
I don't remember that one.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one in the early 80s.
Yeah, and so, what the result of that was that more and more kids were just laughing and cynical about what adults were telling them. And I thought that there were some messages that they really needed to hear. And I'll tell you this one now, here is maybe controversial, but I don't care. I'm saying it anyway. Mm-hmm. There is a real difference between fooling around with marijuana and fooling around with heroin. I have spent 20 years doing research for the government on heroin addiction, and I will argue that heroin addiction does not go anywhere good. I mean, I think people should get help. I don't think they should go to jail. I think all that stuff. But I don't think it goes anywhere good. That's all. And I have been terrified about that. I still, don't want my son, who's now 33. I mean, he doesn't, but I always still tell him, don't. If opioids come your way, just turn around, and because I know they're around. So those were the origins of my beliefs, and which continue now. And then, so we started the Safety First project, and I wrote a booklet called, I told you, Safety First, a reality-based approach to teens and drugs. And the California State PTA, thanks to this consultant we had, got me interviews with the leadership at that time. It's the early 2000s now. And sometimes you think you're not going to penetrate a particular audience or organization, and all it takes is one or two enlightened people in leadership positions, and you're in. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did, and I started distributing that booklet to parents.
Marsha, do you think your role as a parent helped in you delivering this message, essentially mom to mom, and it kind of gave validity to your argument? Because essentially you're speaking to concerned parents, and you're speaking to them as a concerned parent. So you had skin in the game, right?
Absolutely. It was critical that I could say and, be truthful, saying, I have teenagers. I know what you're going through. I share your concerns. In fact, when my youngest, when Johnny turned 20, I thought, oh, well, I don't have teenagers anymore. Now what? So I think it really helped me with parents to be a parent. So, I don't have that anymore. I mean, I'm still a parent, but Now I'm a grandmother. How do you talk about 3-year-olds? I don't know. Maybe I will be.
Well, it's never too young to get into drug policy reform.
Oh my
But
God.
one thing I do want to ask you before we let you go, is drug policy too heavy or intellectual of a conversation to include in the drug education discussion for maybe not 7th graders, but 9th graders going through a health class about drugs? Shouldn't they learn about what, not just what drugs are and whatnot, but what the laws are, how the laws are different in other places? And, I mean, it makes sense why we've gone through DARE and stuff like that, why the curriculum looks the way it does right now, like who's in control of it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in an ideal world, shouldn't folks be learning, maybe not to the level of supervised injection facilities, but that there are places where drugs are not completely illegal and people don't go to jail and they do get help almost, without a 6-month waiting list and all the kind of hurdles that we have here?
Well, so 20 years later, now we have this, now we're penetrating the educational system. And one of the lessons is all about the politics of drug policy and the politics of drug education, which was really a tool of the war on drugs beginning in the early 80s. And so, yes, absolutely. We think that kids need to understand their rights. They need to know how we got here. And so, yes, to answer your question, yes, the political part of this whole issue is included in this particular curriculum.
So, Marsha, before you go, I want to see if you can impart some wisdom to some listeners in the audience. I'm a parent myself, and I sought your counsel in how to have this kind of conversation with my kids. And so what would you say to a parent who is hearing this conversation, is interested in the Safety First curriculum, but wants to have that one-on-one conversation? So if a listener said to you, Marsha, how do I talk to my kids about this stuff? I mean, I have my own history that I'm not proud of, and, what do I tell them? What would you say to them?
Well, there's 2 parts to that question. There's, what do you say in general? What kind of message do you want to impart? And I don't want this to sound like I'm promoting my own stuff, but that letter that I wrote to my own son when he was 14 has been coined by one of our colleagues as evergreen. If you read it now, it wouldn't occur to you that it was written 20 years ago. So, and some people have told me that that's what they have done, that they used that letter and read that letter to their own kid, and with the message of harm reduction and the importance of safety. Now, on the other part of your question about whether do you tell or do you not tell, mm-hmm. I can tell you that I don't know how many PTA presentations I have made over the years, so dozens and dozens of them. And when it comes to the Q&A part, the one consistent question is, should I tell my kids about my own drug use? And we're not talking about people who've got serious problems necessarily.
Right.
And so my answer to that is that, first off, I think you have to be careful about lying, because this is what happened to me. I thought, well, they don't really need to know everything. And I went to UC Berkeley in the late 1960s, and, that should just tell you everything. Okay. So, so I'm going along, and actually for my kids, they didn't ask. Maybe they didn't ask because they assumed. Or even more probably, sometimes teenagers are not that interested in you.
Right. Right. They just didn't want to know.
Yeah. So I'm going along, and I have a younger sister, and siblings are interesting that way. They like to reveal all kinds of things about you to your children that you didn't necessarily want them to know. So here is my sister kind of regaling them with all of my own escapades in college. And I thought, and this can happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably going to get busted, by your kids. Or here's the easy one. Yes, and it's a quote from somebody else, not from me. Yes, I did. It was a big mistake, and I really regret it. And drugs are much different now than they were then.
Aye.
Okay. Well, yes and no. That one I just kind of like did, because for some of them it wasn't a big mistake. It was okay.
But people who get caught always feel like they have to say it was a mistake for the optics or something.
Yeah, the mistake was getting caught,
right?
Yeah.
Not the use itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the experience, right?
Yeah. Well, but they'll know if you get arrested, or you can talk about that. They'll get that. So anyway, that would be my perspective.
Another thing that you've always talked about in the quality of drug education is that it needs to be honest, and it doesn't insult the intelligence of the kids that you're actually trying to reach. And I thought one of the best lines of the panel, well, back up a little bit, I think what was the greatest about your panel is because there was an actual teenager on that panel. Mm-hmm. So this wasn't a session that talked at kids. You actually had a kid speaking to his peers in the audience, and I thought that was wonderful. And he had the line of the day talking about the value of who the messenger is in drug education. And I'll paraphrase. He said something to the effect of, having a cop teach a DARE class is like having a nun teach a sex education class. Yeah. And I mean, that put it all in perspective. So yeah, of course the message is going to be abstinence. Of course the message is going to be that it's going to ruin your life. And I think when you eliminate half the message, you're insulting these kids' intelligence, because trust, like you said, Marsha, they will bust you because they're a whole lot smarter than we think they are.
Oh yeah. And they often know a lot more about drugs than we do too. So the idea that we're gonna educate them, we're gonna tell them, that we should start by listening to them.
True. I mean, can't think of a better way to end this. Marsha, thank you so much for joining us, and personally, thank you so much for the work that you do. It's been so incredibly helpful in my journey with my own children, and I'm sure that there are thousands of parents who can say the same thing. So thank you for being who you are and doing what you do.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Marsha. This was such a great conversation.
We love you, Marsha.
Thank you.
Drugs and Stuff is brought to you by the Drug Policy Alliance. If you like what you hear on the podcast, do us a favor and rate the show on iTunes. Give it 5 stars and a nice review. Also, we love to hear from you. Tweet at us at drugsandstuffdpa, use the hashtag drugsandstuff, and check out our website drugpolicy.org to see the other work we do, sign up for our emails, and donate. Special thanks to our producer, Katherine Heller, and to the hardworking staff of the Drug Policy Alliance for all of their work. Thanks for listening.